This podcast is brought to you by Contessa Digital.
Sometimes the things in life that are best for us are also the hardest things for us to do. And that can include ending a relationship and breaking up. So we're going to talk about why it is so difficult sometimes to end a relationship. Welcome to Confidently Cherished. My name is Keshia Rice. I am a dating coach and hypnotherapist. I help women learn how to heal from their unhealthy relationship patterns and create healthy, cherished relationships. And if you are watching this on the day that this episode comes out, and you have been listening to me for a while, your calendar is correct. Today is not Wednesday. It is Thursday. I apologize, y'all. I have been feeling under the weather and I'm still a little sick, so this is going to be a short episode. But so sorry for being a day late. Thank my assistant Jay for being patient with me. And let's get into, I have 7 reasons for why it is hard to end a relationship. So number 1 is you don't want to mourn. Because at the end of the day, the end of any relationship is a death. It is the death of all the hopes and expectations and dreams that you had for that relationship. It is the death of a season in your life. It is the death of a connection that you had or thought you had with a person. And all deaths require mourning periods. And deaths and mourning are uncomfortable. So some people struggle with ending a relationship because they don't want to go through the pain that is mourning from that relationship. They don't want to go through the pain that it is not knowing what the next step is going to be. The uncertainty of having to end this situation where even if it wasn't the healthiest, you at least knew what to expect. You at least had some consistency in being able to, if you were in an unhealthy relationship long enough, you start being able to predict your partner's unhealthy behaviors. So at least you have that. Like, you know it's not good, you know it's not healthy, you know that you can be treated better, but at least you know what treatment to expect, right? Better the devil you do know than the devil you don't know. So, yeah, breaking up can be hard because you don't want to mourn. The second thing that can make breaking up difficult is not wanting to fail or to be wrong. If you grew up like me as a perfectionist, and if you also grew up like me as someone who is stubborn, then breakups can be very difficult because you go into a relationship and you give it your all, you give it your best faith effort, and there can sometimes be this feeling that if a relationship ends, even if it ends for healthy reasons, right? Like no one cheated, there wasn't any long-standing anger, there wasn't any abuse or anything like that. The two of you just realized that you simply weren't aligned. Maybe you're better as friends than as partners, or maybe you're just better apart than together. So even if the breakup itself was healthy, there can be a part of you that feels like ending this relationship is a failure on your part. That either you failed because you couldn't make the relationship work, or you failed because your picker is wrong in the first place. You were attracted to somebody that you had no means or no reason to be with. The same can go with not wanting to be wrong. So especially if you were in a relationship where in the beginning you just knew the two of you were meant to be together and you were certain about it, but other people were telling you that this relationship might not be the best idea, and you were determined to prove them wrong, and in the end, they were right, it can be really difficult to admit to that and to let the relationship go. But, something that multiple women in my family always told me and gave me advice on was just because you dedicated a lot of time to making a mistake doesn't mean that you have to continue to dedicate that time. Doesn't mean you have to continue to make that mistake. The number 3 reason why breaking up can be so hard, why it can be so hard to end a relationship, is not wanting to be disloyal. Oftentimes society teaches us that loving people means being very loyal to them. It means sticking it out, pushing it through. And how often do we hear that when we talk about, oh, why aren't relationships lasting the way our grandparents' relationships lasted? And people will say, well, it's because back in the day, people were loyal to each other. They stuck together. And they ignore the fact that, quote unquote, back in the day, women didn't have rights. They couldn't have property. They couldn't have their own bank accounts. So financially, women had to get married. And divorce was not an option because they would have been up the creek without a paddle. My grandmother divorced at a time when divorce was not common. And she survived, but it definitely was not easy for her. And so many women her age stayed in terrible marriages because they didn't see any way out of it. So now we have this whole idea of loyalty instilled in us, not understanding that a lot of that loyalty was really more loyalty to self, loyalty to survival, not necessarily loyalty to that man that they were with. And you can love someone and still know that the relationship isn't aligned and still know that the relationship needs to end. And I would say in that case, it is actually in faith and loyalty to doing what's best that you are leaving that relationship. So I think this is 4. Oftentimes, it is hard to end a relationship because you don't want to let go of the fantasy. When you begin a relationship, you are meeting the best version of that person. And because you want to impress them, you are also typically the best version of yourself in the beginning of the relationship. It takes some time for you to get settled, for you to feel comfortable, for you to be vulnerable enough to show all sides of your personality, and for that person to do the same. So because of that, the beginning of a relationship is often just so good and wonderful and magical and all of that. And it's easy to get caught up in that. It's easy to get caught up in the two of you being the best versions of yourselves. And then you also have these hopes and dreams that you come into the relationship with, that you add them onto the situation. And you build up this fantasy thinking that if the two of you stick the relationship out, eventually it is going to become this fantasy. And I don't want to burst your bubble here, but even in a good relationship, that doesn't happen, right? Like, I'm married now. I've been married for 5 years. And when my husband and I first got together, I had certain thoughts and ideas for how, if we eventually got married, how the relationship will work out. And some of that has definitely happened, but not all of it. And I'm not even saying that in a negative way, because we've been through a lot, right? We celebrated our 1 year anniversary when the pandemic hit. So there was a lot of stress involving quarantine and all of that. Also, just being a Black woman, everything that was happening with George Floyd at that time was just stressful and disheartening. And then, not only do you have the political things that are going on that affect couples, because if you think that politics doesn't affect you, it totally does. Even if you are not politically active, it affects the economy, your taxes, healthcare, all of these things, right? But beyond that, there's just the personal stuff. Since we've been married, we've dealt with deaths in the family. We've dealt with, financial issues. We've dealt with things with friends. Like, all of these things happen that are just normal parts of life. And on one hand, being married and having a partner is wonderful and beautiful because you have someone to go through these things with. There's a quote, and I cannot for the life of me remember who said it or even give you the exact quote, because again, right now I'm sick and my brain's a little fried, but paraphrasing it, it is something along the lines of being in love means having a person to multiply your joys with and divide your sadness. So when trials come, when stressors come, you have someone to share that burden with. And that makes dealing with the burden easier, but it doesn't mean that the burdens don't put stress on your relationship. So I love my husband, and I am so grateful to have him. And I'm grateful for the things that we've been through and being able to look back over the past few years and say, yeah, we did that. We overcame that. But the exact fantasy in your head, in the best case of circumstances, still won't happen. So how much more so is that the case when you are in relationships that you are not aligned with this person, when this person is not right for you? Understanding that and letting go of that makes it easier to, when you are aligned with a person, to stay with them, to work on the relationship, to improve your communication and do the things that you need to do. And when the relationship is not right for you, understanding this makes it easier to let go. So, number 5, the 5th reason why it is hard to end a relationship is not wanting to end the chemistry and chaos. I have been a dating coach for long enough, and I've studied relationships and psychology long enough to have a bit of a red flag go off whenever I hear someone in a new relationship say, "We have so much chemistry. It's just amazing how much chemistry we have." Because chemistry, what they mean by that is often that kind of explosive, chaotic passion. And it's one thing to have that in the first couple of weeks, but in healthy relationships, you settle into a routine with this person. You get to know this person well. You become comfortable with them. You become vulnerable with them. And the love becomes more comforting. It becomes more like snuggling under a warm blanket. And that's how it should be. I've heard many women say, including some clients of mine, after having a history of unhealthy relationships, thinking at first that the person that they ended up with was not a good match because the relationship felt quote unquote boring. And I had to explain to them that boringness was a good thing. Like, don't get me wrong. You can do things to spice up your relationship. You can definitely do things to reignite, the passion and all of that. But healthy relationships are settled. Healthy relationships aren't confusing. And oftentimes, when people get in these volatile relationships where they are constantly breaking up to make up, and they are on this roller coaster of emotions all the time, they get addicted to that feeling. They get addicted to the chaos. And they have a hard time letting go. You have to understand that that is not healthy. Like, think about it. Do you seriously want your nervous system to be wrecked all the time? And I get that not everyone wants to get married. Not everybody wants to have kids. But if you're listening to me, you probably are in those boats. So think about that. Would you want a marriage that is constantly chaotic and volatile? Would you want to raise kids in an environment like that? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't be looking for those things in a relationship, and you shouldn't leave a relationship that, after the initial puppy love stage, if it's still feeling like that, something is wrong. Number 6, breakups are hard because people don't want to be alone. And I have seen that especially in the past couple of years. The pandemic did a number on all of us. It really did. I don't think anyone's mental health is quite the same as it was before 2020. And we are also lonelier than ever because there was a time where spending a lot of time in a third space was common, right? And by third space, I mean this idea that, okay, the first space in your life is your home. The second space where you have social interaction is your job, your career. And then the third space would be places like church, for my ladies of other faiths, synagogue, mosque, wherever you worship. A third space would be if you volunteer within an organization, or if you're in some type of social club. These are common third spaces. And since the pandemic, we have fewer of them. Fewer people have second spaces because a lot of people work from home now. And then with the third space, people got used to, again, using the Christian example in church, people got used to attending church services online. There's a book now out, and I cannot think of it. Guys, I'm sorry. I promise my brain will be back next week. But it is all about the decline of evangelical churches since the pandemic, because once people stopped going to church in person because of COVID restrictions, and then some people just didn't jive with online services, there are large groups of people who just stopped going to church, period. So that is one common third space that isn't as strong as it used to be. I would say the same for like in-person volunteer opportunities. Certain organizations and social clubs shut down during the pandemic, and they either stayed shut down or they are not as robust as they used to be. And people just got used to becoming homebodies and not going out as much in general. So with all that happening, people are lonelier than ever. People don't socialize and hang out as much as they did before the pandemic. So for a lot of people, their main source of socialization is a romantic partner. And because of that, they can be kind of hesitant to let go of a romantic partner for fear of If they do that, then who are they going to go to the movies with? Who are they going to go out to eat with? You have to, first of all, start finding second and third spaces again. I love working from home, but I know people who worked from home and hated it and voluntarily went back to work in office. As far as your third spaces go, if you are religious and you stopped going to your religious organization, maybe now's the time to start going back. Now is the time to get involved in volunteer opportunities. I have been on a whole health journey this year with trying to lose weight, exercise more, eat healthier, all of that. And one of the things that really helps me is group fitness class. I go to Pilates classes several times a week, and it motivates me to stay healthier because, one, I'm paying for this membership, so I don't want to waste it, right? But two, you start to see some of the same faces every time, and you start to socialize a little bit, and you get motivated to go back and see those people. So find third spaces. Don't allow yourself to be so dependent on one other person for your social life. And the seventh and final reason why it is so hard to end a relationship is not wanting to miss out on being chosen. And I kind of hesitated to put this one down in my list because there's so much talk on social media about women who are pick-me's and all of that. But at the end of the day, all of us want to be chosen. All of us want to be loved. And there's nothing wrong with that feeling. The problem is when you let that desire to be chosen override your desire to be treated with respect and to be in relationships that serve you. So, oftentimes, as adults, we end up replaying some of the relationships that happen in our early lives. This means that if we had parents who weren't as loving and as attentive as we needed them to be when we were children, we often end up in relationships with people, romantic relationships, that play out in a very similar way. And then we get in relationships with these people and we try to change the story. We think that subconsciously, we feel that if we get this person to love us, adore us, pay attention to us, all of that, then it will make up for the way that our parents treated us. It will make up for the lack of love that we received back then. And it will prove that all this time where we weren't treated the way that we needed to be treated, we weren't loved the way that we needed to be loved, getting someone as an adult to treat us that way, and not just someone who would naturally treat us that way, but finding someone who is kind of like our parents and convincing them to love us will prove that we were worthy all this time, even if our parents couldn't see it. This is why it is so important for us to love ourselves first and then allow our love for other people to come from the overflow of that. Because the last thing you want in life is a Groundhog Day situation. Some people don't know how to love you. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with them. Because yes, there are people who never healed, are unhealthy, don't know how to love. And then there are people who just don't know how to love you in particular. Because, again, the relationship is not aligned. Not because there's something wrong with you or something wrong with them. And that's not your problem. So we have to learn how to move on from the people who don't serve us and focus on the people who do. It's not selfish. In fact, it's the least selfish thing that you can do, because not only are you making space for the right person to come into your life, but you're allowing them to have the space for the right person to come into their life. But that can't happen if we're so determined to keep this death grip and hold on to what doesn't serve us. So these are the 7 reasons why breaking up is so hard. And I have 2 resources for you and a favor to ask. So the 2 resources are, there's a great book I will put in the show notes. It is called A Breakup Because It's Broken. Highly recommend that book. Also, I will put in the show notes, I have a journal called Ditch the Dead Weight. It's really more of a workbook, but it has several journaling prompts throughout to help you with healing from the end of a relationship. So check those out. And then also, the favor I like to ask is that, as you've probably heard, Confidently Cherished has been nominated for the Women in Podcasting Awards, and I am nominated in the relationships category. So I would love it if you could give me a vote. That would be amazing. I will put the link to that in the show notes as well. And when you go on the site to vote, there's a lot of different categories. You don't have to vote in all of them. You can just go straight to the relationships category and vote for Confidently Cherished. But it would mean so much to me if you could do that. So thank you in advance. And let me know what you thought of this episode, or let me know about a time that you were in a difficult breakup and how you got together the courage to actually end it. You can reach out to me on social media. I'm at Keshia Rice on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So I will talk to you soon. Love you so much. Hey there. So you made it all the way to the end of the episode, which means I have 2 things to say. 1, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And 2, you like me. You really like me. So I would appreciate it if you would show that like by subscribing to this podcast so that more people can hear about it and enjoy it as much as you do. And if you want to know more about any of the links that I mentioned on this episode or any guests that I've had, be sure to go to KeshiaRice.com/links. That's KeshiaRice.com/links. I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode. So see you then.